Welcome everyone to our final Ultimate Cloud Salon of the semester. Um, I'm very happy to welcome Libby Rose Striegl from the Media Archaeology Lab at CU Boulder. Uh, Libby is a polydisciplinary practitioner, variously interested in collaborative engagement, performative chaos, and archival impermanence, and DIY defamiliarization, pro-complication, imperfection, and visibility, and actively dismantling the black box. So thank you so much for joining us, Libby. And for anyone who's not in the know, Cloud Salon is our virtual Zoom-based lecture series or guest speaker series. We've been going since 2020 and going strong. So yeah, Libby is our sixth guest of the semester and rounding out our lovely attendees. So without further ado, if you'd like to take it away, Libby, we can get started.
That sounds great to me. So, just to give you all like a little, the academic-y background thing. My name is Dr. Libby Rose Striegl. I hold a BA and BFA in film studies and film production from CU Boulder, MFA in experimental documentary arts from from Duke University, and then also a PhD in the IWP program, Intermediate Arts Writing and Performance. There are a lot of acronyms in our world, and I forget them sometimes from CU Boulder as well. So I graduated with my PhD in 2020, which was not the best time to be graduating with a PhD. And since then, I have been the managing director of the Media Archaeology Lab. And I guess we're going to talk a little bit about how the hell I got there, because that is not where I would have expected myself to be even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Definitely not where I would have seen myself ending up. So just to give a little background on the MAL, the Media Archaeology Lab is one of the world's largest collections of functional obsolete technology. And my role within that is sort of many-fold. I help students with projects, I help researchers with projects, help artists with projects. I help to run the artist residency that is currently in our fourth. Oh, we have two this month. So four artists this month, or four artists total so far this year. I think we're doing 12 this school year. And so I play a sort of supporting role in every project that comes through the lab in some fashion. I also manage the identity of the lab. It is sort of a performative thing to run a space like this because it is a community space, because it is it's a time machine. It's a time machine. You can go back in the past and in our space visit technology dating all the way back to the 1890s. You can experience it hands-on. You can have this sort of weird anachronistic experience of like a phonograph player right next to the first commercially available CD player, right next to a slow scan TV transmitter, right next to a typewriter, like all of these things mashed up in this very interesting way. And so I function as this sort of curatorial presence within it, and sort of guide how that looks to a visitor. And because I do most of the tours, I'm also guiding the experience of the people going through the space. It's a big job, but it is also sort of the thing that has grabbed most of my creative attention for the last. Well, I started loosely managing it as my research assistantship throughout my PhD, and then since then, I've been for the last 3.5 years really full time doing this work of guiding the experience of that space. So as much as it looks like an administrative job from one angle, it is also a like full-time performance gig from another angle, which is what makes it interesting to me. The other aspect of that is also that I am the primary person doing maintenance work on all of the machines, while we do have volunteers who do have their sort of special select interests and will do maintenance work on machines within that interest. Anything else kind of falls to me, whether that's me doing the repair work or me coordinating the repair work. So it is a sort of maintenance practice as well. And it is then by necessity, like a practice of understanding how these things work and how they work within the world, but also how they function as a discrete object themselves. So I'm I'm in this weird place of being a practicing artist myself, but also being in this administrative role. Um, and I've tried to kind of come to terms with how that is where I got to from the places that I started at. And a big part of it is just that I've followed every impulse that I've had with regards to my education and my opportunities, as opposed to like trying to direct where I'm going. I'm kind of chasing the dopamine as it goes. But also, like, I'm really interested in the way that media technologies work and the way that people interact with those media technologies. And I'm really interested in how collaboratively we can make a space function. So I've been working in a sort of cross media collage way for a while. I started off as like a very traditional experimental filmmaker, working on 16 hand processing, editing on a Steenbeck, like very traditional experimental film world. And that wasn't fulfilling in the way that I wanted it to be. And it was also not leading to any sort of opportunities that I was interested in pursuing. So I took a long break between my undergraduate career and beginning a graduate career again. And that looked like working at a humane society as an animal behaviorist for 6 years. So I really took a large detour outside of my art practice before I was able to come back into it. And I think that sort of combination of life experiences really affected what I was able to do going forward. It helped for me to not take things so seriously because that is a very serious career and it is a very high pressure job. It helped me to kind of compartmentalize things, but also helped me to put things in a perspective that, like, academia is a lot of things, but it is not a life or death situation, and neither is art making ever. And so once you have been in a situation where, or a career where you have in fact been like hospitalized because of your work, you start to really see a different perspective when you move out of it. So I was able, when I moved into my MFA program, to really stop taking my artwork seriously and start having fun with it. In my MFA, I started doing stuff like this, where I was taking my background in filmmaking, and thinking about what that meant in terms of like things on a scroll, things within time, things within space, and also taking, if you are an experimental filmmaker working on 16 millimeter film, you are inevitably a person who loves obsolete media, and obsolete technologies, camera technologies that are like, you have to know how to repair them to some degree or know someone who knows how to repair them. You have to understand the machine in a way that you don't have to with a digital camera. And so that love of machines extended for me to anything else as well. And one of those things is dot matrix printers, which is a weird thing to love. No one loves printers. I love printers. But they allowed me to sort of rethink my relationship to things on a scroll, essentially. To I was creating these giant paper loops, basically, that ran through the printer and destroyed themselves as they were going. So it would print over and over and over and over itself, and destroy the paper going through that loop. And so I was starting to think about like making machines as works of art, or configuring machines as works of art in addition to using those machines to make other works of art. So there's a book that came out of this, like an art book that came out of this, of the pages that were destroyed by the printer, which is itself a piece. And thinking about those relationships really pushed me into this next phase of development. I was also working with 3D printers at this point, and I was 3D printing 16 millimeter film because the material nature of film is so important to film, like makers of analog film. And I kind of wanted to make fun of that a little bit, mostly because I know a lot of experimental filmmakers and was the student of one who's quite famous, passed away now. Um, and, and so I was like, I get frustrated when people are precious about stuff and are like treating it as a wholly, for lack of a better word, treating things as precious objects that are not to be disturbed or messed with in any way. And that's how film as a material is treated in a lot of ways. And so I wanted to mess with that a little bit. So I was printing 1 second long strips of 16 millimeter film, and then I was optically printing them, so like magnifying those strips so I could look at the filament itself. This turned into large, like photo prints, but also turned into a film called Filament Studies, which has shown quite a bit, but is like literally using the filament itself from a 3D printer to create this abstract animation. It was also a bit of a dig at people who think of 3D printing as a perfect duplication process. You look at these things that are all printed from the same model, and like the structure changed based on the color of the filament, based on the time of day that I printed. Like there were so many variations within this supposedly like perfect replication process. And this was like 2013-ish, so like peak of 3D printers are the future sort of messaging from Make magazine and all of that. So I was really in trying to interrogate that system, but also is like an understanding of the material and an understanding of the machine, and this sort of collaborative effort between modern tech and quite old tech in terms of a printer, an optical printer, and a projector. Um, so that was sort of this basis that I built the next stages of my career off of, but also led to me thinking about like all of this is kind of lonely work. This is me working by myself with these machines that I think of as collaborators, but are that they can't give me new ideas. They can only bounce back what I've already fed them. So when I got the opportunity to start my PhD, I also met my partner in this creation called Sharing Turtle, which is a fake corporation, a fake tech company. And Laura and I started collaborating together, and that has become the most sort of fruitful part of everything that I've done. So this drawing is we were ahead of our time because they started selling these things for real during the pandemic, but we created this idea called personal office devices, which were actually just if you were ever a child who played inside of a refrigerator box, or Calvin and Hobbes' imaginary world inside of his box that could be anything, the transmogrifier. We were designing these pods out of recycled materials, boxes, and then selling them as though they were a great tech innovation, which it was an extended comedy routine, basically, but also an exercise in like exploring the ways that we're sold stuff from tech companies. And so we developed a couple other fake things. And then Laura was able to go to a big fancy job in Texas. And so we haven't been able to collaborate as much, but we did develop a sort of series of fake tech products, some of which have now become real. You can buy like personal office device type things, these little pods that you install in an open plan office to give yourself privacy, um, which is really funny. It's very funny to me that they have become um, real objects. It's very silly. Um, and that was all kind of at the same time that I was working on my PhD thesis. So my dissertation was called Voluntary Deconvenience, and it was a series of workshops aimed at tech re-education and defamiliarization around 4 topics. Um, one is called the Take It a Party. The Take It a Party is an anti-workshop, and it is meant as a way to introduce people who consider themselves bad at tech to concepts of repair and concepts of like physical object ownership, because I do strongly hold the belief that if you do not understand how your thing works, then you don't actually own it all the way. So being able to repair your stuff is a really important step in getting to know what your thing's doing. But Take It Apart's sort of aim was to get past the psychological barrier of like, I don't know how to fix that. How should I approach fixing this thing? And so we'd start with already broken stuff that had been donated to the Media Archaeology Lab that was not going to be useful for the lab because it didn't work. Uh, there was probably no point in repairing it because it was either beyond repair or we had many other examples of it. And then just taking it apart, treating it like a dissection, looking at all of the things inside, trying to identify all of the parts, looking at the circuit boards and trying to like track down like what links to what and how. But in a sort of like I always brought cupcakes in a very friendly way, like that doesn't have the same overtones that a lot of tech speak does. Uh, Related to that was the differ networking was a way to look at networking protocols, but also like network structures and to talk through with people what they think their personal network looks like versus how it's structured in like corporate network topology. So you think you have all of these friends that you're directly connected to, but if you look at the topology, you're actually connected to a satellite that's connected to another tower that's connected to, like, there's all of these barriers in between you and the person you think you're directly connected to, and thinking about that and talking about like other ways to structure networks, both literally and figuratively. Uh, Data recollection was a way to talk through security and privacy in a friendlier manner than maybe your IT people do. It came out of a very deeply frustrating history of experiencing many security talks that are all just scare tactics that lead to people not actually doing any of the things that they're being advised. And so teaches people how to actually make a threat model, how to think about like what is actually necessary for themselves, not just being told you're doing all of your security wrong, you need to do this and this, that are all these like high-end security protocols that are maybe not necessary for most people's lives. And then Why Do We Share was a sort of open source introduction to open source computing and hardware, and like thinking through why open source is closer to how people have learned for the bulk of human history. We talk about how to make a paper plane and how you learned how to make a paper plane. Probably somebody just shared that knowledge with you. how do you how do you get knowledge when you're younger versus how do you get knowledge when you're older? There are these initially open ways of thinking that we espouse in schools that really shift once you get older and you start having to pay for everything, including like literally having to pay for software that you're basically renting instead of uh, actually owning. Um, and you can't talk to the developer when something's wrong with it. Or if you try to, they're going to tell you that that's the way it's supposed to work, and you're just doing it wrong. So thinking about like the difference between a relationship with a corporation and with a small group of maintainers of an open source project is a kind of metaphor for a whole bunch of other ways of learning. But that's what has kind of led me to where I am now, basically, is like these coalescing of things, plus the history of just being a really weird kid who liked to take stuff apart. Um, that's kind of behind all of it. I'm going to play a little bit of a tour from the lab, or just sort of pop you through a little bit of a tour from the lab, because I spend most of my time in this space where I'm taking care of all of these machines that you maybe recognize some of them, maybe you don't. But they're all, no, that's not what I want. There are all of these devices that, some of which have been forgotten from history. We run on a pirate TV station. We run a pirate radio station. We have sort of a million different things going on at all times, and they all collaborate together with myself and with my volunteers to create a space where we're challenging a little bit the dominant narrative of technology that we're fed on a daily basis, and thinking through other ways to think about the future and the past. So that gets me to the end. And that's just a little list of things.
Well, thank you so much, Libby. That was really informative. I want to see if there's any folks in our audience who might have any questions, either about your journey to where you are, or possibly about what Mal is up to. And
Yeah.
so yeah, if there's anyone who would like to ask a question, you can excuse me, you can't unmute yourselves just for safety, but if you raise your hand, I can unmute you and you can ask your question. Or if you would prefer to ask a question in the chat, we can definitely go that route. So if there's any questions, we can start there. And if there aren't, I can ask some questions. All right, I'll get it started then. So I wanted to talk or ask about the autopoetic printer for a second, because I think
Sure.
that, along with the image you showed of the scroll of paper inside of the, like, behind the screen, was really interesting to even just think about that term scroll itself as a skeuomorphic term, right? A reference to a technology that no longer is the prevalent means of whatever kind of
Totally.
mediation it's doing. And yet it persists, this terminology from ancient times, like a scroll that someone's opening, like a wizard opening a scroll is, well, wizards aren't historical, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
That we're still referencing
Alchemist.
this.
Alchemist.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Alchemist. Yes. That we're referencing this technology that is no longer in use, and yet the idea of scrolling, and especially from the autopoetic printer, the endless scroll, as it's come
Mm-hmm.
to be in our lexicon, is so pervasive. So I wanted to see if you had any thoughts about like how the endless scroll and the autopoetic printer and this connection through history are all involved in your practice. And Mal.
So I popped that image back up just because I love it so much. I find these educational images fascinating because there are many different ways. Like I could pull up four or five other ways that they tried to make scrolling on a computer screen comprehensible. I have always been interested in the way that like skeuomorphic design carries through everything. Everything is a reference to something in the past, whether we're aware of it or not. And so, like, the autopoietic printer being a reference for me to film projection and to the idea of loop film projection is kind of inherent in it. But there's also this like idea, like, what if our printer screens or our computer screens were paper? Like, what, like, that was a thing at a point in history. Like, there was a point where we had paper terminals instead of screens. There are all of these things that are sort of erased by the ever present now. And if you start to pull pieces from all of them into one place, you get this very weird picture of us as a species, of like the history of things, of like when you start to understand the the ways that things are connected over time, whether or not there's any awareness of that. You start to feel like a really weird time traveler, and I've always felt that way. And part of it is just because I have an insatiable curiosity about this stuff, probably. But also part of it is because, like, there are connections, and like the way that we teach people things is to reference things they already know. Uh, and because I'm a teacher and because I include teaching and workshopping as part of my art practice, it becomes really important to like understand how you're teaching someone something.
Mhm.
And so that's part of my fascination with all of this stuff, is like how do we convey the information that we're trying to convey, and like what references are we making in the process of doing that. Even going back to, they're not visible on here, but like I have cave painting tattoos on myself because of the the connection to the history of filmmaking and this thinking of like spatial imagery and understanding of like how light causes things to look like they are moving through space. And like film isn't moving either, it's a bunch of still images, but our brains do weird shit all the time. And so all of that is kind of infinitely interconnected for me. I hope that
Completely.
answered it. I got
Yeah.
excited and started rambling.
No, no, we welcome excited rambling here in DT. Um, I just realized also that the bottom line on that top scroll is missing in that graphic. The 3Dness is broken.
It's yeah. It's an Apple II instruction book from 1984, I think. I think they were. It's the actual illustration is very tiny.
Hmm.
So they're going for impact, not accuracy.
I'll forgive them.
Mm,
No, but I think what you said about this history and lineage of the development of technology as referential is really interesting. Um, and is it brings me to another question that I have about what in your mind the future of mal might look like, especially with the prevalence of planned obsolescence and the move away from dedicated hardware towards more specified software.
yeah.
What does that look like for like the preservation and archival mission of having all of this technology available for artists to either continue to present works that were designed on older technology? Yeah, when we're moving into this whole new paradigm of our interaction with software over hardware.
Yeah. It's a genuine challenge and a genuine concern, and something that we're already confronting because we regularly get hardware that is obsolete, not because it doesn't work, but because it no longer has access to a server, um, whatever server that might be, or because the software that it needs to run is no longer maintained, and so Apple won't let you install it on your computer, uh, or because any number of things. So part of what we are doing to sort of combat that is thinking about recreating infrastructure as well as preserving the actual physical hardware. That's why we run the pirate TV station, so that we can have analog over-the-air broadcast for our television collection. Part of why we have the pirate radio station, and part of why Lori and I have gotten, Lori Emerson is the founding director of the lab and close collaborator. So that's why we have gotten very interested in ham radio as well, and thinking about like how to, like one of my ham radio projects is thinking about how to build a 2G, like a micro 2G cell tower, so that we can actually start operating our cell phone collection, which you saw a picture of. Because currently they, like, you can turn them on, but they don't do a whole lot if you can't make calls or send text with them. And also thinking about building out a like micro pager network, thinking about all of these things where you have to recreate the infrastructure in order to make the device function. And we're doing some of that in collaboration with other researchers and artists. We have a volunteer who's been absolutely instrumental in getting demonstrations of old internet tech, like Prodigy and CompuServe online communities back online in our space. Even if they're only housed on our local server, we can at least go to those spaces on the hardware that they were intended for now, and start thinking about like how the network side of stuff happened. And that is part of this is because Lori's current major research is into like non-internet networks and the history of other networks. And so we've been exploring all of that stuff for the last few years anyways, but also part of it is just like, if we want to continue collecting things, we have to figure out how to make them continue working. There's kind of a black hole of things that were online from like mid 90s through now, of like, if the server goes down or the company goes out of business, it's just gone, unless the archive team from archive.org has gotten their hands on it. And sometimes it's privately stored. One of our constant reminders to people is like, if it's something that is important information, don't put it in a private Discord. You've got to make a website for it, because then at least it can be archived. If it's in a Discord or if it's in a Facebook group or something like that, it's not accessible, and it cannot be preserved. It disappears. So the fact that so much knowledge is hidden away in spaces that people think of them as permanent, they're presented as permanent by the companies that create the thing. Discord is presented as like this, it's a great space to archive your group's stuff and like do all this, but they've gotten so huge and so instrumental in a lot of communities that they're actually doing themselves a disservice by being in a privately held server and not accessible to something like the web crawler for the Wayback Machine. Because if Discord decides that your group doesn't meet community standards anymore, you're gone, and all of that information is gone. So
no, that, I mean, yeah, it's scary.
It is scary.
It's a scary fact, especially given all like in this community, in our DT community, so much of us are so dependent on all of these systems over which we really have no control.
Yeah.
And then also thinking about it from a longer term archaeological standpoint, if all of these devices are not at all self-contained, if they are just if the actual device is just the small physical manifestation of all of the computing that's happening in the cloud, there will be a moment, it seems, when there is a period of great darkness in the historical ledger if something were to happen to the servers.
It's already happening.
Yeah. We can look at the Antikythera device and see what it does. Yeah. But if we look at a Internet of Things device that talks to the server, it will just be lost to the sands of time. So that's something to think about for everyone who's doing Internet of Things projects.
Yeah.
Um,
The more control you can have over your technology, the better, is always my argument. Um, but there are a lot of things that make that an increasingly difficult proposition.
mhm. Um, I wanted to talk about your 3D printed film also. Well, actually, I don't want to dominate the conversation too much. So yeah, I want to remind our participants that if they would like to ask any questions to our guest, they can either raise their hand or ask in the chat. We see something here. Okay, great. So from Mawa, thank you for sharing. This was fascinating. What's your everyday tech device of choice nowadays?
I have a I have a rooted Google Pixel phone that is 10 years old almost, that I do most things on, because I have at least been able to strip it of Google stuff. And I have a jailbroken Kindle that I read things on. Uh, I do have a very new MacBook Air because my all of my other computers died on me. But that's the newest thing that I play with. Um, and on that, I'm running a dual boot of Mac OS and Linux. And on Linux, I do a lot of things that are not supposed to be talked about publicly because they're not technically legal. Uh, but that is where my collection of DRM stripped ebooks lives.
Calibre, is that the right
Calibre,
program?
that I love
Yeah.
Calibre. Yeah.
Oh, we got another
Yeah.
Linux user.
I use Pop OS. I like Pop OS a lot, mostly because I know the people that maintain it because they're local and I can
Hmm.
go complain to them when something doesn't work.
Um, so maybe I'll jump to excuse me, to Take It a Party, the anti-workshop. I love this. I mean, the first step to knowing how to put things together is taking them apart, right? Knowing how you can break stuff is a good way to figure out how
Yeah,
stuff can get broken and how it can get fixed. Um, and
totally.
I wanted to hear your thoughts on like the right to repair movement and like you said, like where we're leasing essentially technologies from our corporate their corporate sources.
I am a big proponent of right to repair. I've broken every warranty I've ever had. I will just put it that way. I am a big fan of and constant advocate of right to repair legislation, um, uh, which is a funny thing to say for an anarchist, but like it is vitally important. There's a reason that I own a very old car, uh, because the newer stuff you don't actually have the right to repair yourself. There have been some major steps forward in terms of right to repair, but it's one of the most important things in terms of both environmental and social and economic protections that we have, is the right to repair the things that we own. Um, I get a little worked up about all of this stuff, but it's you have to take them to a dealer, to answer the question that's in the chat. They have to be a licensed dealer. Most of them have proprietary technology that they claim is protected under copyright. Um, I think copyright is bunk, but um, that's a whole different discussion. Copyright only serves to protect, yeah, no, everything. And there is no car that is safe from like spyware at this point. It's everything. Your
Well, except for your
Toyotas,
car.
all of it. Yeah. Well, my car is 37 years old, so um, the other one is 13 years old. That there's a good reason to not buy things that have too many computers in them, I think. Um, we've made advances. There have been positive advances, but it affects things more than just like personal technology and like vehicles and stuff. Like wheelchair users are not allowed to repair their own wheelchairs. There are only so many places where you can get parts to repair tractors. All of this stuff ties into right to repair. And all of it ties into sort of aggressive abuse of copyright law by large corporations, really. At this point, copyright really only serves to protect corporate interest.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interesting information about for anyone who's interested in that, like the John Deere is one of the bigger bad guys in this situation,
Yeah,
where they can basically brick a tractor from wherever they want to.
yeah.
But yeah, this is a
It's
whole
it's
it's
it has turned a lot of farmers into software pirates, which I think is fascinating, because they're basically jailbreaking their $300,000 combines with Ukrainian written software so that they can repair their own tractors. Um, yeah, it's fascinating. I think it's
yeah,
so
and
interesting.
you may not stereotypically think about farmers as technologists or
Oh,
conservationists
but they really
necessarily.
are.
Yeah,
They really, really are. Uh, yeah, there's serious technology involved in, like, if you look at what the inside of a tractor looks like at this point, it's like a spaceship, genuinely. Um,
mhm.
it's fascinating. Um, yeah,
Well, okay, we can move on
that
to a
was a
lighter
digression.
topic. No, I wanted
Minor
to ask.
digression.
We like those two. I wanted to ask more about your 3D printed film project and
Yeah,
how you think about combining the new and the old in this way where you can recreate analog or other technologies that are the forebears of technologies that we're still more actively using, but using digital
yeah.
fabrication or other more recently developed techniques.
So let me show you a little clip of that animation real quick. So this, I was not actually like making photographic film. I was just making physical plastic film strips, um, and then looking at the like structure of that 3D printed stuff. So this is just a little clip of that animation work. But I was also at the same time making blocks for the printing press out of 3D printed like filament deposition prints. And I was also laser cutting wood blocks for printing, because I was thinking about precisely this. And because I'm also a technologist and I've worked as like a support technologist for a lot of labs and like for a dance company and a bunch of other stuff. I was working on projects where people were trying to like make touchable museum artifacts out of 3D printed materials or make recreations of ancient wood blocks to sort of get the experience of physically doing the thing for experimental archaeology reasons, which is a fascinating field if you have not interacted with any experimental archaeologists. They're great. um, but all of these things to sort of think through how we can use modern technology to protect old artifacts, but still be able to interact with a simulacra of them. So I've done a whole bunch of like 3D printing busts that were originally carved in marble so people could touch the texture, and trying to get as close to the actual texture as we possibly could, things like that. And like this was 10 years ago, so we've made leaps and bounds improvements in terms of 3D printer technology and usability since then. So a lot of the people that I was working with initially on those projects have gone on to be able to actually fulfill the things that they were starting to think about at that time. But it's really, I think it's fascinating. Like we run Buddy. Um, we run Raspberry Pi as a sort of proxy to connect some of our computers to the internet, like our Apple II and stuff, to the internet, so that they're able to do interesting things using software that's written for them, but having an internet connection provided by proxy through a Raspberry Pi. I use a 3D printer on an almost daily basis to make repair parts for stuff. Uh, we do we do all sorts of things, whether they are like purely functional or they are sort of an extension of the project. That dot matrix printer in the automatic printer project had a Raspberry Pi built in as its brain so that I could use it as a wireless printer. All of this stuff is a way of sort of reinvigorating the stuff that we already have. One, like all of this stuff exists and it's present, and preserving it in sort of perfect place is not interesting or useful, because most of it is not, it's like mass produced crap. um, and then uh, like also, if you can take a new microcomputer and put it into an old microcomputer and make that into a functional device without printing, like without having to go through the whole like process of making a case and all of that other stuff, if you can make those things line up, then you're saving things environmentally speaking. You are reusing stuff in a way that is actually functional. I am a little salty about people who are like preservation style collectors of vintage tech, because like it's mass produced plastic and it's full of circuit boards, and both of those things, like if you just let it sit in a warehouse, it's going to stop working, it's going to start crumbling, it's like the solder joints will all go bad, all of those things are going to happen as an effect of time. If you continue using it and you continue like maintaining the boards, replacing the capacitors as they go bad, resoldering joints, you can make the lifetime of that thing extend far beyond what was sort of originally planned for it, and also expand its use in a whole lot of ways that were never imagined originally.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really important to note that it's not just a question of nostalgia.
Yeah,
It's way. I mean, there's obviously some of that, but
sure.
it's also I mean, it's a political statement of making use of stuff and not waste.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean, a lot of the stuff in the lab, we're an interruption on its stuff on its trip to the landfill. Like it was headed to a landfill anyways, so we might as well use it, and maybe we'll break it, or maybe we'll figure out a way to use it differently than it was intended. Um, it's yeah. As far as a
but
favorite
see,
FDM printer, we just use a Creality. Uh, they're easy. I like store stuff on ours when it's not actually being used very much, and then I pull it off and it prints just fine right away. Which compared to what it was like when I first started doing 3D printing work, is like miles and away better. I originally was working with a MakerBot replicator, and you had to like rebalance the bed between every print and shit, and it's terrible. So what we have now is very nice, and you can get
and you
one
can
for a
write
hundred
custom
dollars.
and you can write
Uh,
custom G code to reheat your pizza for lunch.
yeah, it's great, and like yeah, and you can get it for $100 instead of 1,200. And I also have a visceral hatred for MakerBots.
All right, so we're just about coming up on the end of our time. If there are any last minute questions from the audience, now would be the time to do it. And if not, I'll take this moment to say thank you so much, Libby, for joining us, as well
You're very
as
welcome.
your beautiful feline there. Um, before we, oh, Johnny, is that a
Oh,
question? 1 second, I can unmute you if you want to speak your question.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you, I like also have a big interest in like that type of like old tech hacking and like restorative processes using like new technology and like jailbreaking and stuff like that. And I also wanted to ask if
mhm.
you like, had any resources and stuff like that that you like could point in this direction for people who like aren't.
Oh, so many old dudes on YouTube telling you how to get stuff working again.
Yeah.
There's so many of them. But really, especially if you're interested in specifically computing and like video game technology, there are so many people on various online spaces who are so excited to share what they know about them.
Mhm.
So if you go, there's still a lot of them that are active on Twitter. There's a lot of people that are active on Mastodon. There's people who are, I understand, who are active on Facebook, though I don't go there, so I don't know. Um, but there's lots of people who are active in those sort of social spaces that are more than happy to share with you probably more than you want to know about stuff. If you've got, especially if you've got a specific piece of technology that you're working with,
Right.
that's been really vital for the lab, is like, because I end up being the one who catches all of the stuff that breaks that nobody else wants to deal with. I pose a question on Twitter or on Mastodon, and usually I have some sort of answer within a couple days, if not sooner.
Okay.
So it's a very excited community.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, so find Libby or Mal on Twitter and Mastodon and follow all of their followers. That'll help you get to the audience.
Especially there's a Mastodon server called oldfights.space, which is all vintage computer hacker guys who do all sorts of interesting projects. And there's people like selling new boards on Tindy and stuff who, like, that's where we get, if we want like an Ethernet card for an Apple II, that's where you can find it.
All right, last chance. Any last questions before we go to announcements? Okay, so I want to just take a moment to make some quick announcements. Just one more time, the Just Tech Fellowship is going to be closing their applications on the 31st of January. I'll pop that link into the chat there. Additionally, this Friday is our holiday long table hosted by Sven Travis, our program's founder. So be there and be square. And finally, tomorrow there's a screening and a Q&A with director Ruben Hamlin, moderated by Dave Carroll, for the film Another Body, and that is at 7:30 p.m. In Kellen Auditorium. So check it out, and thank you everybody for your questions and attention, and thank you so much, Libby, for joining us.